3 refrigerated trucks rolled through the gate of Cole Orchard just after sunrise. They carried Arkansas plates, polished steel trailers, and the green and gold logo of Hearthstone Preserves across their doors. By 7:30, 14 workers were carrying shallow crates out of 2 mobile cooling containers and stacking them onto pallets. Inside, every crate were peaches that looked ordinary from the outside: golden skin, red shoulders, and a little orchard dust still clinging around the stems, but whenever one split open, the flesh inside was dark red. 3 weeks earlier, Dale Mercer had stood in that same orchard, cut one of those peaches with a wooden-handled knife, and called the entire crop defective. Now Dale stood beside his pickup, while Rachel Dunn, a representative from Hearthstone, checked the final pallet numbers. She signed the bill of sale on the hood of Ethan Cole's truck. Dale looked down at the price. Then he looked again. "You're paying that much for processing peaches?" Rachel capped her pen. "We're not paying for how they look in a grocery bin," she said. "We're paying for what they become in a kettle." Around them, the workers stopped talking. A grower who had laughed at Ethan in the feed store 3 weeks earlier stood near the loading line with half a red peach in his hand. This time, he said nothing. Ethan took his father's old peach knife from the sorting table, wiped the blade clean, and folded it shut. 24 days earlier, he had not known whether the orchard would survive the month. Cole Orchard sat outside a small Missouri town where nearly every family knew the weather by smell and the fruit market by rumor. Ethan's father, Robert Cole, had planted the first commercial rows there in 1987. For 24 years, the Cole family had sold most of its peaches through Mercer Valley Produce. There was an old photograph in Ethan's packing shed showing Robert Cole shaking hands with Dale's father in front of a wooden loading dock. Beside it hung a faded plaque, 20 years of loyal supply. Ethan had been 12 when the picture was taken. He still remembered his father telling him that contracts mattered, but relationships mattered more. "Paper tells you what a man has to do," Robert used to say. "Years tell you what he'll choose to do." After Robert died, Ethan continued selling through Mercer Valley. The prices were not always the best. The grading was sometimes stricter than Ethan thought necessary, but Mercer owned the largest packing line in the county, controlled most of the refrigerated transportation, and held long-standing contracts with regional grocery distributors. When weather turned bad or fruit ripened too quickly, Mercer Valley was the company local growers depended on. Ethan believed 24 years meant something. That belief lasted until the red-fleshed peaches began to ripen. 18 of Ethan's 42 acres held a peach variety most commercial orchards in the region had abandoned. The fruit looked normal until it was cut. Inside, red pigment ran from the skin almost to the stone. Some peaches were rose-colored, others were deep crimson. Robert had preserved the variety by grafting wood from a small group of old trees planted by Ethan's grandfather. The peaches had real weaknesses. They softened faster than standard yellow peaches. They bruised if workers stacked them too deeply. If picked fully ripe, they could not tolerate long-distance transport in ordinary field bins. And when customers unfamiliar with the variety saw the red flesh, some assumed the fruit was spoiled. For those reasons, Mercer Valley had never wanted many of them. In good years, the company accepted a few small loads at processing price and mixed them with ordinary peaches destined for puree. But Robert had noticed something the packing companies ignored. The red peaches were sweeter. Their flavor remained strong after cooking. Their color deepened under heat instead of turning dull brown. For years, he recorded those traits in a handwritten orchard ledger. Ethan had continued growing them, partly because the old trees were healthy, and partly because removing them felt like erasing his father's last unfinished experiment. That summer, the trees produced the largest crop they had ever carried. Ethan estimated nearly 138,000 pounds. It should have been the year the old variety finally paid for itself. Instead, it nearly cost him the farm. 5 days before harvest, Dale Mercer arrived for the pre-pick inspection. He brought 2 grading supervisors and a clipboard. They walked the standard yellow peach blocks first. Dale checked size, firmness, skin damage, and sugar level. Then they entered the red-fleshed section. Ethan picked a peach from the third row and handed it to him. Dale used Robert Cole's old wooden-handled knife, which Ethan kept on the sorting table during harvest. The blade passed through the fruit. Dark red flesh appeared around the pit. One of the supervisors leaned closer. Dale frowned. He cut another peach, then another. All three were red inside. "What percentage looks like this?" he asked. "All of them," Ethan said. "That's the variety." Dale lowered the knife. "That isn't specialty fruit. That's a customer complaint waiting to happen." Ethan thought he had misunderstood. "You've bought these before?" "Small quantities. Mixed processing loads." "You knew what they were." "I knew your father grew a few unusual rows. I did not know you expected us to classify 18 acres of internal discoloration as marketable fruit." Ethan pointed toward the testing equipment in Dale's truck. "Check the sugar." "This is not a sugar issue." "Then send samples to the lab." Dale shook his head. "A lab cannot make grocery customers buy a peach that looks rotten when they cut it." One of the supervisors turned the fruit over in his hand. Dale took it back and placed it on the sorting table. "You can give discoloration a family name?" he said. "It still won't pass a produce counter." The two supervisors remained silent. Dale wrote something on his clipboard. Mercer Valley would accept the standard yellow peaches. The red-fleshed crop would be rejected from the fresh fruit line. For industrial disposal and low-grade puree, Dale offered 8 cents per pound. Normal processing peaches in the region were bringing around 24 cents. At 8 cents, Ethan would not recover the cost of picking, sorting, cooling, and hauling the fruit. He would lose money by harvesting it. Ethan looked toward the rows his father had grafted by hand. Dale followed his eyes. "Your father knew these belonged in small batches," he said. "Don't turn his unfinished experiment into your family's debt." The packing yard went quiet. Even the grading supervisors stopped writing. Ethan did not raise his voice. He picked up the wooden-handled knife, wiped the peach juice from the blade, and closed it. Dale shut the clipboard. "Our offer reflects the handling risk," he said, "not your family history." The first betrayal was rejection. The second was exploitation. The third came the following morning. Ethan called 2 smaller buyers in neighboring counties. Both had already heard that Cole Orchard had a large volume of fruit with unverified internal discoloration. Neither wanted to take the risk. Dale had not called the peaches diseased. He had not accused Ethan of dishonesty. He had used a phrase vague enough to sound official and serious enough to frighten anyone who might have considered buying them. At noon, Mercer Valley sent Ethan a formal notice. Because his red peaches had failed the company's internal appearance classification, they could not enter Mercer's shared cooling facility. The reusable harvest bins Ethan had reserved would be reassigned. Mercer-affiliated trucks would not transport the fruit without a signed processing downgrade. The time Ethan had been given on Mercer's packing line was released to another orchard. When Ethan asked for an independent retest, Dale said the seasonal classification was final once entered into the system. "Our shared packing system cannot accept fruit that has failed internal appearance classification," he said. "You accepted them when my father grew them. Your father never asked us to treat them as a full commercial crop. You're closing every road out of the orchard." "No," Dale replied. "You changed the relationship when you refused the classification." The language was calm. The result was not without cooling. The peaches had less than 48 hours after picking before quality began to fall. Without bins, Ethan could not move them efficiently. Without transportation, even a willing buyer would struggle to reach him in time. Then, the weather forecast changed. A slow-moving summer storm was expected to reach the county in 5 days. 3 to 5 inches of rain. The peaches were already near maturity. If they stayed on the trees through the storm, many would split, soften, or fall. 5 days remained. Every hour now had a price. At the feed store, growers spoke quietly when Ethan entered. Most were not cruel. Some had grown peaches longer than he had. They understood why Mercer was cautious. Near the counter, A chalkboard showed the week's buying prices. Yellow processing peaches, 24 cents. Coal red peaches, 8 cents. Subject to internal discoloration. Ethan stopped when he saw it. A grower near the coffee machine shook his head. Mercer is paying disposal price. And Ethan still thinks he has a specialty crop. Another man laughed. Maybe he can sell the story if he can't sell the peaches. A third grower examined a photograph Ethan had taken of the fruit. Every orchard gets red bruising, he said. Cole just gave his a variety name. A few men laughed. Not loudly. That made it worse. Ethan bought the packing tape and replacement thermometer he had come for. He did not answer them. He kept the receipt, wrote the time in the margin, and left, near the register. 2 seasonal workers from Ethan's crew were discussing whether to move to another orchard. They had families to support. If Ethan's crop had no buyer, they worried the harvest might stop halfway through. Ethan did not blame them. He told them wages would be paid for every hour already worked, but he could not yet promise how many days remained. That evening, his wife, Laura, spread the farm accounts across the kitchen table. They had enough operating cash to finish the normal harvest. They did not have enough to gamble on 138,000 pounds of rejected fruit. The roof over the western storage shed leaked badly. They had saved $19.400 to replace it before winter. The farm also owed a machinery payment in 6 weeks. The red peach harvest would require more than $31. Cero pulgada labor. Cooling, containers, testing, and transportation. Mercer's 8-cent offer would produce roughly $11. 000 before hauling and handling. It would not even cover the cost of saving the fruit. If we spend the roof money, Laura said, and nobody buys those peaches, we still owe the workers. I know. And once they're picked, we can't put them back on the trees. I know. She looked at him. I'm not afraid the peaches are unusual. I'm afraid we're spending real money to defend a memory. Ethan did not answer immediately. Then we don't defend the memory. He said, we test the fruit. He went to the old packing shed and opened the cabinet where Robert had stored orchard records. Inside were pruning notes, spray schedules, rainfall totals, grafting maps, and handwritten harvest sheets. Ethan found the ledger for the original red-fleshed block. His father had tracked those trees by row number, yield, date picked, firmness, sugar, loss after storage, color after heating, amount of added sugar required for preserves. Near the back of the book, Robert had underlined one sentence twice. Too soft for a crate does not mean too poor for a kettle. Ethan read it again. It was not proof. It did not create a buyer. It did not solve the cooling problem. But it showed him the mistake in Mercer's judgment. Dale had graded the peaches according to what happened in a produce aisle. Robert had been measuring what happened in a processing room. Ethan called Mara Bell, a food processing specialist who worked with small farms and regional manufacturers. He explained the variety and read her the old records. Mara did not tell him he had discovered a treasure. She said, "You may have good fruit. You do not yet have a reliable processing crop." Ethan remained quiet. She continued, "One sweet peach proves nothing. One beautiful jar proves nothing. Can you deliver consistent acidity? Consistent color? Consistent yield? Can the fruit survive handling? Can you separate ripe from overripe? Can you trace each batch back to a block? Not yet. Then Dale may be wrong about the fruit. But he is not wrong that you do not have a commercial system." That sentence hurt more than Dale's rejection because Ethan knew it was fair. Mara agreed to help him design a test, but she warned him not to choose only his best peaches. "If you hide the failures," she said, "nobody can trust the good numbers." The next morning, Ethan divided the orchard into coded harvest blocks, R1 through R6. He selected samples from the hill, the low ground, the shaded rows, and the oldest trees. He recorded firmness, temperature, size, sugar level, and visible damage. Mara arranged independent testing for acidity and basic fruit quality. Ethan cooked small batches in the licensed kitchen of a nearby community college. He weighed the fruit before processing. He weighed the pits, skins, and discarded portions. He measured finished puree. The numbers were promising. The red peaches produced a strong natural color without added coloring. Their sugar readings were higher than the regional yellow peach average. Their flavors survived cooking, but the weaknesses were real. Fruit from the low rows softened too fast. Some crates had high bruising. Mixed ripeness loads produced inconsistent results. Mara pointed at the records. "This is not one crop," she said. "It's 6 slightly different raw materials. Until you handle them separately, no processor will trust the average." 4 days remained before the storm. The following afternoon, Dale returned with a final offer. 8 cents per pound. Mercer would take the entire crop. But Ethan had to sign a document confirming that the peaches had failed commercial quality standards. The document would protect Mercer from future claims. It would also make it nearly impossible for Ethan to market the same fruit elsewhere as specialty-grade processing peaches. The agreement stated that the crop had no verified commercial use beyond low-grade industrial processing. Dale placed the paper on the hood of his pickup. "This ends the problem today." Ethan read every line. Then he folded the document and handed it back. "No." Dale looked toward the orchard. "You're going to leave 100,000 pounds on those trees because you don't like the word defective? I'm refusing to sign something that says we proved they are defective. You haven't proved they aren't." "That's true." Dale waited. Ethan continued. "But I'm going to measure it." Dale checked his watch. "The 8-cent offer expires at 6. After that, our trucks are allocated elsewhere." "This is pressure." "No," Dale said. "It is scheduling." That afternoon, Ethan made the decision he could not reverse. He used the roof money to rent 2 mobile cooling containers. He signed a labor agreement guaranteeing wages to 14 pickers, whether the fruit sold or not. He bought shallow produce crates at retail price. He paid for expedited lab work. He hired a small independent refrigerated truck to carry test loads. He also signed a short-term extension on the farm's operating credit, placing the small utility tractor as additional security. Then he ordered the crews to begin harvesting all 18 acres. Once the peaches left the trees, the clock would run even faster. Laura watched the first crates come into the yard. "I hope your father was right," she said. Ethan looked at the numbers on his clipboard. "So do I." Mara sent the test results and processing data to Hearthstone Preserves, a family-owned jam company in northern Arkansas. Hearthstone did not offer to buy the crop. They agreed to test 600 pounds. Nothing more. Ethan selected fruit from several blocks and sent the complete records, including the bruising rates and softness problems. The first production trial produced a beautiful dark red preserve. The flavor was strong. The color held after heating, but nearly 18% of the shipment was too soft for efficient mechanical preparation. Hearthstone paused the trial. Their production manager called Ethan. "The product is good," she said, "but the incoming fruit is not consistent enough for our line. Are you rejecting it? We are not ordering more until we understand the loss rate." Outside, the first drops of rain struck the metal roof of the packing shed. One cooling container was almost full. The second had begun throwing an intermittent temperature alarm. More than 40,000 pounds remained on the trees. Fruit in the low rows had begun to split. Ethan had spent most of the roof fund. The bank had called that morning to confirm the new credit balance and the tractor listed against it. 2 workers stood near the loading dock waiting to learn whether harvesting would continue through the night. No large buyer had committed to a purchase. Dale drove past the orchard that afternoon and stopped by the road. He did not smile. "I heard the processor stop the test," he said. "For now, our offer remains open until 6. After that, our trucks are committed elsewhere." Dale placed another copy of the agreement on the hood of Ethan's pickup. 8 cents. "We load tonight. At 6. The trucks are gone." For several minutes, Ethan considered it. Selling to Mercer would stop the immediate loss. It would pay part of the labor bill. It would reduce the credit balance. It might release the tractor before winter. It would also end the experiment and classify the fruit as waste. At 5:15, Ethan stood in the packing shed with 45 minutes left. Rain hit the roof. The container alarm sounded again. The workers waited outside. Laura stood near the office door with the payroll ledger in her hands. Ethan looked at the 8-cent agreement. Then he called Hearthstone. He did not defend himself. He did not blame the truck. He did not blame the workers. He sent the full 18% rejection report. Then he sent the block codes. The worst fruit had come from the low rows near the drainage ditch. Those peaches had been harvested later in the day, packed more deeply, and mixed with firmer fruit from the hill. The 18% loss was not random. Ethan said, "We mixed 3 maturity levels. That failure belongs to our handling process." The production manager was silent. Ethan continued, "I can separate them by block. Pick half a day earlier. Cool them within 45 minutes. And load them in shallow crates. I'll send another test. You only pay if it meets the standard. You understand another failure may end the evaluation." "Yes. We would need a discard rate below 8%. Cooling within 45 minutes. Full pallet traceability. Consistent sugar readings. And a puree yield that justifies the special handling." "I understand. Why are you sending us the bad numbers?" "Because, if I hide the bad crates, the good records mean nothing." Hearthstone approved one more trial. At 6 o'clock, Dale's offer expired. Ethan did not sign. The second shipment was smaller. Every crate carried a block code. Harvest time, temperature reading, firmness range, and cooling record. The crew picked earlier. Fruit was shaded immediately. Crates were kept shallow. The peaches entered forced cooling within 45 minutes. Ethan excluded the softest low-ground block from the commercial trial and documented why. At Hearthstone, the results changed. The discard rate fell from 18% to 4%. The puree yield exceeded that of the company's ordinary yellow peaches. The fruit required less added sugar. The color remained strong without artificial coloring. In a blind taste test, the red peach preserve scored higher for flavor intensity. Every pallet could be traced back to a harvest block and picking time, but Hearthstone still did not make an offer. First, they ran the numbers. Labor, waste, sugar, coloring, cooking loss, finished jars per pound of incoming fruit. That evening, the storm reached Cole Orchard in full. Rain hammered the cooling containers. Wind shook the trees. Ethan and the workers finished the last high-ground rows under floodlights. Several low rows began dropping fruit before they could reach them. By midnight, everyone was soaked. At 1 in the morning, the second cooling container alarm sounded again. Ethan and a local refrigeration mechanic worked in the rain to stabilize it. At 3:20, the temperature began falling. At 6:15, Hearthstone called. The production manager said, "We want the fruit." Ethan leaned against the packing table. "How much?" "All qualifying blocks." He closed his eyes. Then she gave him the price. 48 cents per pound. Twice the normal regional processing rate. Mercer had offered 8 cents. The normal processing market paid 24. Hearthstone was offering 48. They were not paying extra because the peaches were rare. They were paying because each pound produced more finished preserve, required less added sugar, eliminated purchased coloring, and delivered a flavor their customers preferred. They were also paying for the block records, the cooling discipline, and the handling system Ethan had built. The company agreed to cover refrigerated transport. Ethan looked through the open shed door at the rain. For the first time in 5 days, he could breathe. The 3 Hearthstone trucks arrived 2 mornings later. By then, word had spread across the county. Growers who had advised Ethan to accept 8 cents came to watch. A few Mercer employees stood near the road. The seasonal workers who had worried about losing their jobs were all back on the loading line. One of them placed a fresh label on the side of a pallet. Cole Orchard Red Processing, Block R3. The words stood where Mercer's phrase, unverified internal discoloration, had once followed the crop from buyer to buyer. Dale arrived after the first trailer was half loaded. He spoke with Hearthstone's representative, Rachel Dunn. I hope you understand those peaches failed internal appearance classification. Rachel nodded. We reviewed Mercer's classification. They show red discoloration around the stone. That is correct. You're taking a commercial risk. We completed 2 production trials. Independent quality testing, block-level traceability, and yield analysis. Dale glanced at Ethan. Trials are not the same as a market. Rachel opened a sample jar. Hearthstone had already produced a limited batch for several retail accounts. The preserves had sold faster than expected, but she did not rely on popularity. Instead, she placed a data sheet on the hood of Ethan's truck. It showed puree yield, sugar requirement, discard percentage, processing cost, and finished product value. Then she picked up Robert Cole's wooden-handled knife. With Ethan's permission, she cut a peach in front of Dale. The dark red flesh opened beneath the blade. Rachel held up one half. Mr. Mercer, you graded these as table peaches. She pointed toward the loading trailers. We tested them as processing fruit. Dale looked at the red flesh. Rachel continued. It is not defective. It was classified for the wrong market. She signed the purchase agreement. Dale saw the price. 48 cents per pound. Mercer had offered 8. The ordinary processing rate was 24. Hearthstone was paying double the normal rate and 6 times Mercer's offer. The grower from the feed store looked down at the half peach in his hand. No one made a joke. Dale looked toward Ethan. You're paying double for fruit that requires special handling? Rachel closed her folder. Because the handling system already exists. She placed her hand on the signed agreement. We are buying higher finished yield. Natural color. Stronger flavor. Cooling discipline. Traceability. And a crop we can use immediately. She looked toward the coated pallets. Mr. Wanis, Cole did not just sell us unusual peaches. He built a process that makes them reliable. Then she gave Dale the answer that ended the argument. We're not paying for how they look in a grocery bin. We're paying for what they become in a kettle. No one laughed. The last pallet rolled onto the 3rd trailer. Ethan checked the count, closed the trailer doors, and fastened the seal. As the trucks pulled away, rainwater still sat in the tire tracks from the storm. Laura stood beside him, holding the payroll envelope. They could pay every worker. They could make the machinery payment. They could clear the emergency credit extension and release the tractor. There would even be enough left to repair most of the shed roof before winter. Ethan watched the final truck disappear over the hill. He did not celebrate in front of Dale. He simply wrote the departure time in his ledger. A week later, Dale came back to the orchard alone. He said Mercer Valley wanted to discuss buying part of the following year's crop. Ethan listened. Dale looked toward the red peach rows. You made us look dishonest? Ethan shook his head. No. The record showed you used one market standard to judge every possible use. You showed people our offer. I showed them the documents. You could have handled it privately. I tried. You called the fruit defective before testing it. Then asked me to sign that word into the record. Dale remained quiet for a moment. Our grocery customers still would not take those as fresh fruit. I agree. The answer surprised him. Ethan continued. Then you were right about your customers. You were wrong about the peaches. Dale looked down at the dirt. Ethan did not ban Mercer from the farm. He did not demand a public apology. He gave Dale 4 conditions for any future business. Written grading standards. The right to independent retesting. No use of the word defective without technical evidence. And no restriction on Ethan's right to sell specialty fruit to other buyers. Dale did not agree that day. But 2 months later, Mercer Valley introduced a new category in its processing contracts. Specialty processing. Fruit independent evaluation permitted. The change appeared small on paper. Every grower in the county understood why it existed. Hearthstone signed a 3-year agreement with Cole Orchard. The company did not ask Ethan to double production immediately. Mara warned him that one good season was not proof of unlimited scale, so Ethan expanded slowly. He improved drainage in the low rows. He installed faster field cooling. He trained workers to separate fruit by maturity instead of appearance alone. He kept every failure record. The following spring, Several neighboring growers brought him samples from old or unusual fruit trees they had considered removing. Ethan did not tell them. Every forgotten variety was valuable. Some were weak. Some had poor flavor. Some had no realistic market. He showed the growers how to test before making claims. Unusual isn't the same as useful, he told them, but rejected isn't the same as worthless either. In the old packing shed, Ethan placed Robert's orchard ledger inside a simple glass case. Beside it stood the first jar of Hearthstone's crimson peach preserves. The faded plaque from Mercer Valley still hung on the wall, but Ethan moved it to one side. Relationships still mattered. He had not stopped believing that. He had only learned that loyalty without measurement could become dependence, and dependence could be mistaken for control. One afternoon, Ethan's 12-year-old daughter carried a peach from the newest row into the shed. She placed it on the sorting table and opened Robert's wooden-handled knife. The flesh inside was dark red. She measured the sugar, checked the firmness, and wrote the results in a new ledger. Ethan watched her record the block number. She included the fruit that passed. Then she included 2 that failed. At the top of the page, she had copied a sentence from her grandfather's notebook. Too soft for a crate does not mean too poor for a kettle. The peaches had not become valuable because someone finally told a better story about them. They became valuable because Ethan built a system that could prove what they were good for. Dale had called the fruit defective. Ethan never argued the word away. He measured it until the work made the word impossible to defend.